hardwood floors, echoes of our family lore. Grandpa's jump shot, dad's fast break, our legacy will never shake. Keys to the gym, unlocking our hearts, 3 generations tearing courts apart. More than a game, it's in our blood. Keys to the gym, our family's love. Sisters cross over, brothers slam, mom's free throws with another jam. Switch up the net, our victory song.
Welcome back, Keys to the Gym fans. This is episode 1 here in 2025. We have been on hiatus, flying solo here in our first episode of 2025. PG season is well underway, and we're going to get back to regular schedule here as we move forward. But wanted to do a special session myself as we open up the year, the new year. Been looking at a lot of different topics and what's happening in the world of basketball, and particularly women's basketball. And I just wanted to spend a little time today digging into a couple of topics. You're going to hear me talk a lot today about where we're at, where I feel, unfortunately, we are at with the game of basketball. We've touched on a few of these topics early on in the show in our first few episodes, but I want to do a deep dive, and I want to talk about a couple issues that are really important to me. As you know, we are located here. We do our show out of North Carolina. That's where we're based. Definitely many refer to as the Hoop State. But I'm sure folks in Indiana would debate that. But anyway, I want to dig into a couple of topics. So, and it really centers around why we do what we do. As you know, I am involved in youth basketball and have been for a handful of years now. Have grown up in the game and really passionate about and care about what the game serves and provides to young people. And when we look at the highest levels and the commercialization of the sport, this is a complex issue, of course, right? As we see, on the one hand, some much needed growth of visibility and demand and need for visibility around what is an exceptional game that's being played professionally by women and at the collegiate level. And we've seen that explosion on the men's side of the game for years now. But as we face an era of NIL and increased monetization and growth of the business of the game, I think, unfortunately, we're losing our way and it's trickling down and negatively impacting the game at the youth level. And it's funny, right? You follow social media, you follow the news, and you see all these stories that really talk about or highlight what's the worst elements of the game and how we need to change. But I don't see change. I don't see anybody pursuing change. And to me, that's really too bad. I think we really have to have serious conversations about the appropriate levels and places and stages, because we're losing what's really special about the game. We're losing core character and leadership development opportunities that come through sport. And we have really de-emphasized, we've just really de-emphasized and gone away from what is the most important. And I think it's impacting participation. I think it's impacting young people wanting to take part in sport in some level. And my focus is really basketball, but I'm very concerned. And, they talk about as it relates to this NIL discussion and as it relates to the commercialization and business of sports, everybody will say you can't put the genie back in the bottle. But at the youth level, at the high school level, folks, what are we talking about? This should be about development. This should be about opportunity and access. And don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting we take competition out of the game. Teaching young people how to compete and how to compete as a part of a team and a group and trying to achieve things that are only able to be achieved by doing it as a part of a team, like those things are critical. And I'm not suggesting we don't want competition. I'm just suggesting that the business of sport is ruining as we speak what is really a critical developmental opportunity. So let me highlight a couple of things. Here in the state of North Carolina, the North Carolina High School Athletic Association has spent the better part of a year, and I'm sure this started more than just a year ago, but they're in the late stages of or final proposal rounds of a reclassification exercise, moving from 4 classifications, so 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A, all the way up to 8 classifications. And what they're referring to this, and it's a model that's been used in high school athletics, they're referring to it as the Big 32 model. And we will move to 8 classifications across the state of North Carolina. And the Big 32 model in particular is really, it's an emphasis on trying to ensure competition and those sorts of things across the classification. They don't want to exceed a certain number of schools to compete, and they also are really focused on making sure that they are able to accommodate growth in the state. So some positives. Listen, there's been significant population growth in the state of North Carolina. Of course, much of that oftentimes is centered around some of our larger metropolitan areas, Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, the greater Raleigh, Wake County areas. And that's great, right? And, just as a sheer, member living here in the state of North Carolina, like growth can be very good for a lot of reasons. Of course, economic, not to say the least. But the Big 32 model places the 32 largest schools in 8A and allows for room for future school growth while maintaining competitive balance across all levels. That is ultimately the bigger picture. And it will be based on enrollment size and ultimately trying to create more even matchups between teams and address concerns about large disparities in school populations. Here's the thing. The reality is that's at the state level for state competition. The reality is that we currently have in 4 school classifications mixed classification conferences right now. Moving to this Big 32 model and moving to 8 classifications is not eliminating multiple classification models. At some of the smaller school levels, 1, 2, 3, 4, even up to 5A, you're still going to have, you could have as many as 3 different classifications in a conference. And you're still going to have split conferences even at the highest levels. Now, what's happening is you're also going to have geographic challenges. So they're pitching this as an opportunity to ultimately improve competition. But every time I turn around and I look closer at this, I'm not convinced it's better for the student athletes. I'm just not. Like, the realities of all of this are really consistent. So let's talk about some potential implications. Okay, let's talk about some real implications for what this potentially creates. Okay, first and foremost, it's a significant departure from existing athletic conference structures. All right, some of the key issues. Number one, geographical disruption. You're going to have student athletes with dramatic increases in travel distances for student athletes. You're going to have dissolution of longstanding geographic conferences. You're going to have creation of conferences that span multiple regions of North Carolina. All right. Then number two, there's a financial burden. Have we really taken a significant look at the estimated cost increase in transportation? It will likely have a disproportionate financial strain on smaller schools, associated with fuel, bus maintenance, driver compensation. There may be additional costs related to overnight travel. Number 3, academic interference, right? Student athlete challenges, increased time spent traveling, reduced study time, higher likelihood of missed classroom instruction, potential decline in academic performance, elevated physical and mental stress. Then you've got some competitive integrity concerns, so structural deficiencies, persistent multi-classification conferences, as I noted. You're not changing, you're not eliminating the fact that at the conference level, the actual meat of an athlete's schedule is still going to have multiple classifications. Okay. Uneven resource allocation, competitive mismatches between schools. All right. So that's item number 4. Item number 5, community and cultural impact. Not to suggest that that's a concern for anybody, apparently. Destruction of historical local rivalries. Yes, I suppose you could play non-conference games against these teams. I get that. Reduce community athletic engagement. If a community member's got to drive an hour on a Tuesday night, do you think they're going to go to the game? So the school who's hosting that team that would normally get a reasonable gate fee because they're more accessible in terms of distance, that's not gonna pay off. All right. There's an impact to tradition and access and spirit, right? Like there are negative impacts here. And then student athlete welfare. Increased travel related stress, higher risk of athlete burnout, potential safety risks from extended travel, disproportionate impact again on smaller sports programs. So there's 7 categories of items that I'd like to think have been discussed and been examined. But as I lay this issue out for you, what does this sound like? No, seriously, what does this sound like? Does this not sound like one particular issue, maybe football at the state level, driving the bus for every other athletic opportunity that's being offered in the North Carolina High School Athletic Association? And listen, do not hear me suggest I do not like football or I do not think it's important. 100% do. Do not hear me say we don't need to consider, average daily enrollments or among schools. But you're not really solving an issue. Does this not sound like what's happened in the NCAA over the last 15 years? A constant movement toward changes that really only benefit. And what I hear when I talk to folks, it's about revenue, right? Maybe not revenue at the school level or district level, but revenue at the state level. Is this really better? What would have happened at the NCAA level if we had just 10 years ago, as we started to see the seas shift with regard to concentration of revenues associated with big football and the bowl series? Did we not just split football out on its own and left everything else intact? Why is this any different? Why? And again, I'm asking these questions and raising these concerns probably late in the game, and I'm sure these have all been discussed. But why would you not just address a different structure for football and leave everything else intact? I don't understand. Because if you really get down to it, I'm not convinced, and I'm not sure many other people are convinced, that this is what is in the best interest of today's student athletes in the North Carolina High School Athletic Association. So again, every time I turn around, I see structural changes that are happening at the most competitive and highest levels of respective sport in this country being driven by revenues and money that we are now addressing and attaching to youth and scholastic level competitions. You cannot convince me this is the appropriate decision. You just can't. You just can't. So I'm looking forward to continuing to engage on this topic, but it's really frustrating to see this occur. And I know there have been open comment periods and opportunities for people to weigh into this. I'm not convinced that they're really listening to district level feedback. Not that that's any surprise if that's the case, because we live in a society where we push a narrative, we make a decision. But when I sit down and pull this apart and look more closely at this particular proposed move in this particular state, it just reads a lot more like how decisions are being made. They're not being made for the greater good. They're being made to address a small portion of those affected. They're just not. And if you play in a multi-classification league, which is competitive, it really doesn't matter how competitive, and you have an opportunity to prepare yourself and compete for a state title in a class in your own classification that may be different from some of the other peers, I suspect you're going to be, if you're really prepared, you're going to be prepared. And you're going to get some benefit from your strength of schedule. And you're going to get some benefit from having to compete against some larger schools. And I understand people could say, well, it could affect seeding if you're not in a conference that is more reflective of the one that you'll be competing in at the state level. That's certainly a good question, a good point to make. But broadly speaking, across the 7 sort of categories that I noted, geographical disruption, financial burden, academic interference, competitive integrity concerns, community and cultural impact, operational complexity, and student athlete welfare, I'm not convinced that you can sign off effectively on all 7 of those categories that it's better for the student athlete or the communities that are involved. You just can't. And as we launch this platform, when we engage in these conversations, it is an open forum to engage in any conversations. I would welcome anyone who is engaged in this decision making is always welcome here to have those conversations. But it's just another example, unfortunately, of decisions and impact made by adults that are affecting something really central to a young person's developmental opportunities that just doesn't make any sense to me. It just doesn't. Which brings me to the next part of the discussion for today and the other item that I wanted to hit on. And that, simply put, is that I suspect and would love to consider what it might look like for us to truly invest in a scholastic model. And everybody who's listening is going to tell me I'm crazy. Okay. But if we're really talking about, if we really thought this was a real thing, right? And so, listen, I've been involved in club basketball now for a handful of years. I've enjoyed the opportunity and appreciate the opportunity to work with young people, something that I'm really passionate about, and have an opportunity to hopefully have a positive impact on someone's interest in development in the game and really working hard to do it in a effective, the right way. But I'm not convinced it's the right way going forward. And I understand that money drives everything. And for years now, we've had the growth of sneaker monies in the game, running circuits, grassroots circuits. And there are other sponsors and operators and people who are in what we refer to as the business of travel basketball, which started out as AAU. And don't get me wrong, there has certainly been positive impact from having additional opportunities. I guess the question I'm really putting out there is the way we're going really the most beneficial? Truly. And I'm not convinced. And it feeds right into my concerns are related to what's on the table that's been proposed by the North Carolina High School Athletic Association. But let's talk about it with respect to just basketball for a moment and what the sort of attach whatever label you'd like to it, AAU, travel basketball, club basketball, whatever, non-scholastic basketball endeavors that happen outside of the traditional season that offer a space for young people to play additionally. Let's look at this for a second. We have instances every year of fights and poor officiating treatment and a reduction in official access, right? And not having enough officials to run events and the rising costs of people to be able to have their children participate in these programming opportunities and the increased monies and industry that's been generated around creating exposure and media and preparedness for college. And it's happening earlier and sooner. And it's really to me, it's really become quite a bit. It just appears too much. I have to imagine there's a better way. And again, here's the problem. We're not really asking the right question. right? The question is, what is it? What is the job to be done? And if we were asking the athlete and the parent, what is the job to be done? Let's just ask the athlete for a second. If we were to ask a, upper middle school, lower high school athlete, what is the job to be done by playing travel basketball? And why do they do it? Because hopefully they're still in a period where they're intrinsically motivated and excited about continuing to grow their game. So hopefully the answer is they love to play and they just want to spend the extra time to see if they can get better. Okay. Now, I don't think it's everybody, but I think there's going to be a broad range of responses from parents. I think parents are going to suggest that the job to be done is to help get their kid a free education. And I would put that on maybe on my scale, maybe the most extreme version of an answer. Okay. And some might say answer similar to the athlete. Well, I just want to make sure my student athlete has, and yes, I'm using that term on purpose, my student athlete has an opportunity to continue to develop something that they're really interested in pursuing at the highest level they can, right? So if they're preparing themselves to continue to grow and compete at the high school level and then maybe college, okay. We'll put that in sort of the middle category. And then, at the farthest other end, it's like, well, I just want my kid to have an outlet to compete and have fun and whatnot, right? And there are, of course, gradations of answers there. And of course, as their athlete progresses through this journey, that answer might change. I think oftentimes we find it changes. Okay. So those are the two answers, right? Parent, of a wide range of answers, everything from I want my kid to get a free education to I want my kid to have fun and do something they enjoy and do something athletically. Okay. And then the athlete in the middle. All right. So let's talk about AAU coaches, travel coaches. What's the job to be done? What's the job? So I can tell you what I view the job as. And mind you, I recognize my perspective may be unique, but I don't think I'm the only one. I think there are a number of us who are really interested in trying to use the game as a way to develop young people. Okay. I think there are others who are doing it as a way to supplement their income, right? And also enjoy being around the game. They're getting a chance to make a little money and be involved in the game of basketball. Okay, I get you. And there are some who it's like their livelihood. You're working with young people and it's your livelihood. Okay. Now, again, none of this is black or white. It's pretty gray. And there are probably wide ranges of people's perspectives. So as the coaches, but for me, it's what it should be. I enjoy the opportunity to give time to young people who are trying to get better. And I have an opportunity to help teach and grow and offer something that I have some knowledge about to help those kids accomplish that goal. Okay. And then you got coaches who are, well, I want to help that kid get a free education. And that's a whole interesting discussion in and of itself. Okay. Because it speaks to what we value as a path to education. Then you got tournament operators. Okay. You got tournament operators. And there are some large conglomerates out there that control, and you will use the word control. And I don't want it to sound wrong, but they do. They control the largest share of operating events that are out there. And at the high school level, it has real implications because they are oftentimes tied to the NCAA's recruiting windows and the live periods and providing showcase opportunities. And so the job to be done is to find the right places and spaces to attract college coaches and teams into one spot and create a space for visibility. And let's think about this for a second. Teams are paying entry fees. Parents are paying gate fees. And they've already paid for their player to participate, but they're paying a gate fee. And those are not inexpensive. College coaches are paying for a packet of all the information and all the teams and rosters that have been curated prior to the event. Okay. And then you have a whole set of other vendors. And again, so that's the job to be done, is to create a space for visibility to occur. And I'm speaking specifically to at the high school level when recruiting is actively beginning to engage. So the job there to be done is to create visibility. And it's expensive. It's expensive for all parties involved. Okay. But this is also happening at levels that are not at a recruitable age, with teams traveling all over the country to play games and spend money. I would put that into the sports tourism category. Okay. The sports tourism category. What's the job to be done there? Right? I mean, listen, with our younger age groups, it's not uncommon for us to finish up the year at a larger, more nationally oriented event to play teams outside of your region that you may not see but once a year. That can be a cool experience. It can be a fun experience for young players. But it's happening a lot, and it's happening frequently, and it's expensive. And I'm not really sure what the job is to be done there. Okay. So that's your event operators, your circuit operators. So those are some key stakeholder groups. And most of those are not really about the athlete. Most of those are really not about the athlete. So again, why is it that we're doing this? Why is it that how did all this happen before we had AAU and club and travel basketball? How did it happen? Kids still went to college. Scholarships were still offered to those who were effectively prepared to compete at the scholarship level. At the Division I, Division II level, Division III schools still were able to identify players. Junior colleges were still able to be available to offer pathways for students who wanted to get started in their journey. It all still functioned. So functionally, what we've done is create a whole new economy. And again, listen, I'm not anti-capitalist. Don't get me wrong. I'm supportive of people being able to create economic value. I'm just questioning. I feel like in some ways there are spaces and places that require just a little bit more thought and a little more intention about what we're doing. Now, I'm not placing blame on it. I don't want to place blame on AAU organizations or tournament directors. I don't want to place blame on them, because you know what, parents, we're responsible as well. We are responsible for functionally placing our resources and opportunities for our young people in a way that maximizes opportunity, but also, does it really change the opportunities? And could the same thing be achieved without all of the machinery, is what I'll refer to it as, without all the machinery? And I do believe that there is. And we have institutions that have been in place for a very long time in this country that I would suggest could add more value to what we really should be accomplishing when it relates to opportunity through sport. We have devalued at all levels the educational element of athletics. We've devalued it. And again, what I want you to hear me say is, I'm not suggesting there aren't people who are doing a terrific job of extending those development opportunities and those leadership development opportunities and those character development opportunities. I don't think it's the majority, but I do know there are some who are definitely using their space and their place when it comes to AAU, club, travel basketball, whatever we want to refer to it as, commercial youth basketball, to extend some of those opportunities. I just don't think it's the majority. And I think it's time. I think it's really time that we challenge some of these questions. So what would I be proposing? Okay. So let's address some of the biggest concerns. Some of the biggest concerns are, we have created an economy around sports tourism that I think sets really unrealistic expectations and divorces us from any real developmental value. So what I'm suggesting is that we move toward a place where we start reinvesting. If we took all of those resources and dollars that are being accumulated, what if each family took those resources and dollars, even a fraction of those, and invested it into their community, vested it into their youth programs in their community or within their schools? Imagine what we could get done or accomplish, how we could advance this combination of athletics and academics and athletics and character and leadership development for young people by taking all of those dollars. I mean, we're talking millions, hundreds of millions probably over the years, if not more, of economic value that's been generated that could be invested into finding a way to advance or enhance the scholastic athletic experience. So what I would propose to reform is shifting a focus from commercialization to educational integration. And you're saying, well, coach, well, John, like we already have that. We do. But there's a lot more that could be done. There's a lot more to enrich it. And we've also gone through a period of time at the scholastic level where we have seen participation drop. We've seen athletes not participate in more than one sport. We've seen coaches have to raise their own resources on their own to provide high quality experiences. We see coaches without access to support mechanisms and resources. We see declining numbers of officials. We see an increase in expectations from families around what it means for their kid to be successful. And so they place all this blame on coaching staffs. And families unfortunately don't have the education to understand what it's all about. So this would be a model that prioritizes student athlete development, academic achievement, and long-term well-being while maintaining competitive excellence through a sustainable educational-based structure. So let's just revisit some of the challenges in the modern landscape. Commercialization's created a parallel system outside of schools. It's increased early specialization, increased risk of burnout, and created financial barriers to participation. Prioritization of exposure over development. The diminished role of school-based programs. Education has become secondary to athletic pursuits. Qualified teacher coaches are being replaced by private trainers. Increasing physical and emotional pressure on young athletes. And listen, when I acknowledge a challenge or change to a system that where we currently are today, I'm not suggesting people who are playing those roles aren't adding value. I'm just suggesting there's a better way for us to apply those people and resources. So in a reform model that I'm suggesting, what would be some of the principles? Educational integration, a development-first approach, an inclusive competition structure. So what does that look like? Let's push all of our basketball activities back into a scholastically invested in experience. There's already systems in place to house this, okay? Let's make sure that our coaching staffs have the support and the educational training and teaching opportunities and credentials to continue to grow in those roles. Let's have some accountability around academic performance and prerequisites for participation. And yes, I understand most places do, but are we actually adhering to them? Age-appropriate training methodologies. I grew up in a part of this country where we had a youth development basketball league, Capital District Youth Basketball League. And it was a competitive opportunity so every town in our area had a recreation basketball program, and it was run by those towns and communities. And let me tell you, we had plenty of teams. And then players from those teams were able to try out for its select teams at certain age groups. And then those select teams, again, those competitive level select teams played in a travel schedule in the late winter, early spring. Okay. As the additional mechanism. Let's encourage multi-sport through middle school. Let's ensure fundamental skill development is prioritized over game exposure. Let's make sure we have regular physical and mental health monitoring. We have many school systems that don't have a JV team, don't have a freshman team, and can barely field middle school teams. We see participation in a lot of cases, and again, this is a generalization, but at times drops off massively after middle school. What about intramural programs for recreational players? Let's provide the resources and tools for coaching staffs to truly run a program, to have an integrated district-wide program to develop athletes within that respective sport. So like here in North Carolina, public schools are restricted to the number of games. But in our independent school structure, they're not restricted. They just have to they have to get their competition done within a certain window. That creates competitive imbalance. It turns independent schools in some cases to extensions of travel and club basketball. So yes, there should be regulated season lengths and practice hours. But in some cases, we need to find some middle ground at the high school level as to what that really is. What does the school-based infrastructure look like? What does teacher and coach development look like? I think about some of the best coaches that I've ever had. These were folks who were educators. They were educators first. The sport was the other thing that made up their responsibilities. Ongoing professional development in both education and coaching. And yes, coaching associations at the state level do provide resources and support. And that's terrific. And I think we could double down or triple down on that. If we were investing in the scholastic model more, players would have access to out of main season development opportunities, as would coaches. How about compensation? We look at compensation sometimes as a tool to attract really qualified teachers and coaches. And it's hit or miss depending on where you are in this country. It's hit or miss depending on what district you're in. But we need to make sure that they have competitive compensation so we can attract qualified educators. And that's actually a system issue. We do not value teaching, broadly speaking. I recognize that it can be a little different from some different regions, but broadly speaking, as a country, we do not value educators from a compensation perspective. Mentorship programs for new teachers and coaches. Program structure. What does it look like to have a coordinated middle school to high school progression? What does it look like to integrate character and leadership development in with your physical education curriculum? Competition format. This gets to the current proposed legislation from the North Carolina High School Athletic Association. Regional school-based leagues. Okay. How about some quality control measures to consider? Program certification. Annual review of academic integration. Coach evaluation systems, player development metrics, parent and student feedback mechanisms. How about coach feedback of their families? How about some accountability on how families engage with their community-based programs? Health and wellness standards. Of course, we typically have health screenings that need to be completed prior to participation. But health and wellness standards, nutrition education, mental health resources. How about financial investments? What does infrastructure look like? We keep building these private complexes. You know how hard it is to actually fundamentally fund the operation of that on a regular basis? It's not easy. It's not easy. But we have facilities, and we could imagine if we took those private resources to continue to invest in making sure that high schools have access to the right number of spaces, the quality spaces, and that they're maintained at an appropriate level. What if there were public-private partnership to ensure that? equipment and supplies, technology for program management, educational materials, teacher coach salaries, support staff compensation, professional development funding, administrative oversight. And then how about some support systems? Academic resources for tutoring programs, study hall facilities, academic counseling, college prep support. Health services, athletic trainers, physical therapists, mental health professionals, nutrition specialists. And this is, I'm just scratching the surface here, folks. If we really took that mechanism, the machinery that we've created inside of this private enterprise that is sport today, the private sport model, and basketball is one of the biggest. And we found ways to shape those resources and push them toward a place where we were integrating those resources with an academic entity, with a public academic entity. Imagine how much further we could value the role of education in athletics. And there's other impacts and effects to this, right? How would the recruiting process change? I suspect it would change for the better for all parties involved. How would those pathways from high school to college look? Just a little bit different, maybe a little bit healthier, a little better understanding. The reality is, folks, it's broken. It is broken. The types of things that I'm suggesting we're doing is just not working. And it's only fueling, in my opinion, a very self-centered, individualistic approach to outcomes. And please, again, do not hear what I'm not saying. I'm not suggesting we don't want to compete. We don't want to create value. We don't want to create economic value. I'm suggesting there are certain parts of our developmental society that we've messed with, and it's going to have long-term negative ramifications. And just because at the professional level things are done a certain way doesn't mean it needs to be done that way at the youth level. Here's some other areas that need to be considered. Parent-related challenges, unrealistic expectations about athletic scholarships and professional prospects, behaviors affecting player development and official retention, overinvestment in private training and exposure events, pressure on coaches to prioritize playing time over development, interference with coach-player relationships and team dynamics. How about the officiating crisis? Declining official retention rates due to mistreatment of officials, inconsistent training and development opportunities, limited integration with educational aspects in the game, and the growing gap between youth and higher level officiating. It's a real thing. What if we had parent education and engagement programs? What if we had official development and protection programs? Youth official development pipelines, zero tolerance policies for mistreatment, integration with physical education programs, mentor apprenticeship programs. Let's talk about teacher coach education standards. We have a real need, but we have a real opportunity. What if we had an officials development program that included starting with athletes at the high school level being developed to understand what it means to be official? What if all of our athletes had to go through some core understanding of what officiating and what the rules are? Do our high school athletes really know what the rules are? Do our parents know what the rules are? What if we started with development? What if there were annual symposiums or biannual symposiums for parents, coaches, and athletes, or coaches, athletes, and officials to all spend time together? These are people too, folks. Do we really understand what goes into it? And if we did, if the shoe was on the other foot, how would we feel? Recruitment and training program for officials, a development pathway which includes on-court shadowing, and a lot of these things do exist in many associations. I think the opportunity is, how do we integrate it and open those relationships up for coaches, officials, and athletes to better understand what it takes to have a successful game experience or a successful season experience. What I'm suggesting is that we get to a comprehensive reform one that really addresses the interconnected roles of educators, parents, and officials in creating an environment that has standards and support systems for all stakeholders that can be sustainable and serves the developmental needs of our young athletes, while I would say in many ways continuing to grow the integrity and joy for the game of basketball. What does it look like? And it starts with recognizing the reality. And the reality is the current system's broken. And even in a broken system, that does not mean there aren't people out there doing a really good job within their small little space. What I'm suggesting is we give the keys to those people who really want to see change driven, who really want to restore and develop and advance or enhance the way that athletics can play a role for our young people and grow in that way. And find ways for public-private partnerships to reinvest the amount of economic value that's being generated in the private entities and pour some of that into the public spaces. There's space for those people who are helping to generate that economic value to play a role in this work too. And that's where we are. So I'm gonna stop there. We're gonna come back to this conversation, but I wanted to open the year up with just a recognition and some thoughts around the realities that as at the professional and collegiate levels, we see models advancing that are incredibly focused on revenue and commercialization and individual value creation, which again, I understand. We're all looking to generate careers for ourselves and resources for our families. I get that. But at a particular level where we're trying to make sure that our young people see the connections between athletics and education, we've really lost our way. We really have. And my call out there is to those folks who really have an interest in finding a way and finding a path to reorient ourselves to a model that speaks to the things we used to value 20, 25, 30, 40 years ago. I'm not sure what the timeline is on that. But that's my call out to folks who really are interested in ensuring that we don't let this completely go off the deep end. So with that, I'm going to close up our first episode for 2025. PG will be back with us in the next one. Busy times for high school athletes, of course, especially winter athletes and basketball players as they're into the back third of their season. Wishing all athletes out there, all basketball players out there, health and well-being and enjoyment as they can finish up their basketball seasons. Thanks for being with me today. This is the Coach, and we'll see you again with Coach and PG on Keys to the Gym.